our bodies are not as protected as we think they are. I mean, it's one thing to not know, or I should say it's one thing to have all these horrible chemicals, potentially horrible chemicals. We can break them down into classes that affect human hormones, fertility, glucose use and utilization, like insulin and all the other hormones for, cancers that are hormone sensitive, growth and development, brain development. But it's another thing to understand that the human body is in and of itself designed and evolved to handle only a certain number of insults. And that we've really had 90,000 chemicals added to our world, at least in the United States. These are the numbers we're talking about just over the last 200 years.
Welcome back to another episode of Health and Humanity. Our guest today is a board-certified rheumatologist and integrative medicine specialist, as well as an environmental health expert in Princeton, New Jersey. She has collaborated with the Environmental Working Group, Cancer Schmancer, and other disease prevention organizations, and is co-editor of the textbook Integrative Environmental Medicine, part of the Oxford University Press Wheel Integrative Medicine Library. In 2015, she created thesmarthuman.com to share environmental health, disease prevention, and wellness information with the public. She lectures nationally on environmental health topics for elementary and high schools, colleges and universities, medical schools, and physician training programs. And she is a regular expert guest for television, print, and podcasts. In 2015, she received the New Jersey Healthcare Heroes Award in Education for the Smart Human educational platform, and she was awarded the 2016 Burton L. Eichler Award for Humanitarianism. Dr. Cohen is working to educate and empower the next generation to make safer, smarter lifestyle choices through the creation of environmental health and prevention curricula for schools nationally. Her TEDx talk, How to Protect Your Kids from Toxic Chemicals, can be found on YouTube, and you can follow her health and wellness tips and recommendations on Facebook at The Smart Human, Twitter and Instagram at The Smart Human. Sign up for the Smart Human newsletter, read her latest post as thesmarthuman.com, and listen to her podcast, The Smart Human. Dr. Cohen lives on a farm in New Jersey with her husband, 2 sons, and lots of furry friends. Dr. Aly Cohen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Dan, for having me. What a pleasure.
Yeah, I got through your lengthy bio, lots of accolades that you have there. I'm always relieved once I can get through the bio without making too many mistakes. So,
no, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you on. Obviously, you have a very extensive background in this topic, but I kind of want to start off before we get into your new book here that you have released within the last month, Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. Before we get into the contents of the book, why don't you walk our listeners through your journey of how you got to where you are today, why you got invested into this topic, and why it's so important to you to educate the world about chemical toxins.
Yeah, well, to begin with, I stumbled into it. This was not something I actually went after by choice, which I think for a lot of people happens as well. You sort of find your direction out of either a major tragedy or maybe a major celebration. But either way, mine was a tragedy. I was a young mom and had 2 little kids, but I had a beautiful golden retriever. He was about 4.5 years old. He was my firstborn because I'm a huge animal lover. And he became really sick around 4.5 years of age, and we just really didn't know what was making him ill. We took him to the vet, and it turned out, and I had just assumed he had eaten something. I mean, he's a golden, Yeah. So we got there, and we found out that at the time that he was sick, that he actually had a really small liver, and he was found to have what was called autoimmune hepatitis, and which is really when the body's immune system attacks itself, particularly at the liver. And what was just so tragic and such a sad irony is that I'm an autoimmune disease specialist, a rheumatologist for humans. And so looking at this animal, wondering how did this dog get such a rare condition, but also golden retrievers even more rare. I I had to start trying to find control by learning about what could have exposed him to something that may have triggered his immune system.
Wow.
So looking at food, drinking water, pesticides, we live in New Jersey, sprayed with pesticides in our backyard, really.
Yep.
Dog and, flea and tick collars, that kind of medication that I was putting on the back of his neck. Even the toy, he had a red plastic toy that he just never dropped out of his mouth. I mean, even while he slept, it was just, he stopped biting the siding of the house. Great. But he was chewing on a red plastic toy for most of his young life. So the long and the short of it is that while I was nursing him to at least reasonable health for the last 6 months of his life, I was really trying to explore how, chemicals affect how chemicals affect animal health. And while I was doing that, I was unraveling this whole problem, revelation that in our country, in the US, we are so unregulated when it comes to chemicals in human health in terms of our environments, our food quality, our drinking water systems, believe it or not. Personal care products and cleaning products require no chemical testing by manufacturing for safety, toxicity, and especially in vulnerable populations like children and immune compromised people before being added to the products that we love on the shelves. And it was just so shocking because as a doctor, I'd never even heard of the idea that chemicals were not safe for us. I assumed they were safe. And we never learned about these things in medical school or residency. And so really that was the start of everything. And it kind of just snowballed out of just, passion and hurt and realizing that I wanted to make this situation mean something because, we love our animals, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible to think that this is going on and so many people don't know about it. They're just simply unaware. And I personally was unaware up until really the last 6 months or so, maybe the last year, through my podcast, having more and more conversations with people about this topic and really being made aware of the issue at hand and what's really going on in our environment and what hopefully can be done to prevent some of this and live a healthier life through it all. So I know you've talked about the term environmental health for somebody that's listening right now, and this is all new to them. And they're like, wait, what? There's like chemical toxins in our environment. Can you kind of just give us a basic framework of what environmental health is?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I didn't even know the term existed for years. I don't think I coined it by far. It's been around, but it's been around in the medical literature, in Western medical studies, in groups that actually do this for a living, that are really understanding it way before I ever did, how the environment affects human health. And that's what environmental health is. And then, of course, environmental medicine, which is, part of the title of the textbook that I wrote with my partner for Oxford a few years back, called Integrative Environmental Medicine, which is, also available. That's a deep dive. But what that expression is saying that there's a medical basis for trying to figure this out, that we now have enough robust data from the Endocrine Society, the World Health Organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American Academy of Reproductive Medicine. Yep. We now know that there is actually a legitimate area of study within medicine called environmental medicine. Environmental health, to me, is extending that and broadening that topic to include things that people don't often think about as an environmental exposure, such as stress, such as noise pollution, light pollution, sleep-related issues. So it brings in the integrative medicine training that I had as well for a few years. So the idea is that I look at the human body very anthropologically because of, I love anthropology. I think we need to think about that more often. But I look at the body as anything that affects or insults the human body's normal physiology, or even well-being, if you want to argue for that reason too.
Yeah. So you're saying we have chemical toxins that are being entered into our body through our environment, through our air, through the water that we drink, through the personal care products that we buy, all of the different products that we have in our home. These toxins are eventually making their way into our bodies. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that kind of made me blew my mind in a way. It was because I realized through all the studying and the reading and the journals that are, again, robust and international, that our bodies are not as protected as we think they are. I mean, it's one thing to not know, or I should say it's one thing to have all these horrible chemicals, potentially horrible chemicals. We can break them down into classes that affect human hormones, fertility, glucose use and utilization like insulin and all the other hormones for, cancers that are hormone sensitive, growth and development, brain development. But it's another thing to understand that the human body is in and of itself designed and evolved to handle only a certain number of insults. And that we've really had 90,000 chemicals added to our world, at least in the United States. These are the numbers we're talking about just over the last 200 years. And so really understanding how that impact of so many chemicals on a body, such as a placenta that may not block those chemicals to a growing fetus, such as skin. The skin we think of as a protectant, right? We love our skin. It's the largest organ in the human body. It's waterproof. It keeps us from so much. And yet we allow medications to be put on our skin in the hopes that it does cross the skin barrier into the body, right? We have smoking medications with patches. We have creams for arthritis. And yet the hypocrisy thinking that these chemicals don't do that as well, the harmful ones. So we have to really think about the absorption into the body through skin, through air, through ingestion, and also feminine care products intravaginally. People don't really think about the number of chemicals that are getting absorbed in young women through tampons. And we break that down in the book Non-Toxic because we want everyone to understand just all the routes of exposure, which chemicals can and can't make it through into the body, what those levels mean, and to potential risk. And then what to do about it, which is really the main point of the book. This is a guidebook, and it's the solutions to the problem, which I was very, very anxious to put out there.
Man, it's so fascinating in many ways, in a bad way, because it's scary to think about the effects that it has on our bodies. You've talked about hormones and issues during pregnancy and what it can do to our skin and growth and brain development. Without being too negative, and I don't want to be an alarmist here, but I do want to educate my listeners. What other effects is it having on our bodies aside from everything that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So I think, I want to step back and try to explain how I tried to figure this out myself. Because I look at myself as an everyday person who had literally no idea about chemicals. Look, I still color my hair. Okay. I still give my kids some, crappy regular candy. I am by no means perfect. It's a journey for everybody. What I've actually learned over the 8 years of doing this is that you have to bring yourself off the ledge. We can always just throw up our hands and give up, or we can kind of break this down in parts. And that's how I learned to manage. So one thing to consider is, chemicals in and of themselves, no matter what, good ones, bad ones, medications, they're all chemicals, can be broken down in a variety of ways. They can be categorized into what their function is, such as, a plastic for containers or food containers, food chemicals, what their purpose is, stain guards, waterproofing chemicals, emulsifiers in food. Okay, so that's by function. They can also be broken down in other ways, including what their harm is. So neurotoxins or liver toxins. And so again, it shuffles up all those chemicals in different ways based on how much data we have. But what I wanted to share with your audience, which I think is the most interesting and the most robust data that's coming out now in terms of environmental chemicals, really from third-party groups like academic institutions, because of course manufacturing doesn't do these kind of studies, are a group of chemicals called endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs for short. And what's come out of this is that there's about 1,000 known endocrine disrupting chemicals now known out of the 90,000, let's say, total chemicals we now know are available for everything in our products, our food, whatever, in the US. Now, those endocrine disruptors have been very well studied, particularly BPA, which has been sort of the poster child for endocrine disruptors. Some of you in your audience also may remember BPA or bisphenol A was taken out of baby bottles in 2012 because of its risks to young children.
Wow.
Because of its endocrine disruption properties. So it was actually removed. Now, my partner for the book Non-Toxic, my co-author for now 2 books, is Dr. Frederick vom Saal, and he is actually one of the people largely responsible for having BPA removed from those baby bottles, because he's a neurobiologist, and this has been his work for 50 years now. I should say that it's about 30 years because it started a long time ago, but not that long ago. Yep. So these endocrine disrupting chemicals as a class have this unique and kind of scary property of being able to disrupt the normal workings of the hormones in the human body, which is why they're called endocrine disruptors, because hormones are part of the human endocrine system. Now, hormones, what are hormones? They're just signalers. They're chemicals at incredibly low levels, parts per million, parts per trillion, like 1 drop in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's how these hormones have worked in our bodies for millions of years of evolution, to be, conserved. These chemicals are helpful to make things happen in the human body: puberty, fertility, growth and development, thyroid function. What turns out is that these chemicals, which were never looked at, many of them at incredibly low levels, at the levels that hormones actually circulate in the body, until recently. It was by accident about 20, 30 years ago. And now we know that some of these chemicals can mimic those hormones in a way that either decreases their production, decreases their utilization, decreases the receptors that they're supposed to respond to when they get to that site to cause that physiologic change. And we know this for BPA is very estrogenic. It mimics estrogen. It can block androgens like testosterone. It can interrupt normal thyroid hormones that manage a whole bunch of stuff. So now that we know that these chemicals have this property at a very, very, very low amount, which kind of has thrown toxicology on its head, right? Because we used to all believe that the dose makes the poison from the 1600s, that the more you're exposed to something, the more likely you're going to have that reaction to it. We know this from drinking. I certainly remember this from drinking in college and onward. But too much sun exposure, you get more burnt. So dose makes the poison was sort of the going mantra for the last several hundred years. But we now know that these endocrine disruptors don't work that way. And because of that, it's lifting the lid on a whole bunch of new information about where they exist, which chemicals have pushed through the system that are in our stuff and potentially can cause harm. So that's a big part of this book is kind of teaching people how and why they work. And then really just how to, very practically try to remove those exposures, which do work. Lifestyle and behavior and product choices absolutely lower many of these chemicals in our blood and urine, which is where they're tested. Yeah.
My goodness, that is mind-blowing. Let's touch on that. So are we, everything you just shared, my first thought is, are we screwed? Like, what are we at?
Are you going to get a drink after this
podcast?
Or
are we at the point of no return? Like, what can we be doing to live in a healthier environment, to buy the right products, to make sure that we're not exposed to these chemical toxins? What are some practical steps that we can be taking here?
Yeah, sure. And we list these. This is the mainstay of the book, but and we do it by section. So there's a chapter on drinking water, what you should know and what you can do. There's a chapter on personal care products, what you should know and what you should do. So we break it down in by topic so people don't have to feel overwhelmed.
Sure.
Now keep in mind, whether someone develops an illness as a human being really depends on 3 things. It depends on your genetics, which play a role, right? Your lifestyle, which is like inactivity or activity, sleep, stress, food choice, food quality, drinking water, that kind of thing. And then there's this environmental exposure. So it's three things: lifestyle, environmental exposure, and genetics play a dance together.
Got it.
Now, which ones can we take, can we have a part in terms of having control over? We know that lifestyle and environment, we can try to make a dent on. You can't always change your genetics. You can't always change your in-laws, but you can in many ways work on the other. And that's really the point of the book, was to say, listen, this is an opportunity for anyone starting at any point in their journey, and really going at your own pace and cutting down these exposures. And then what you're going to do is have a ripple effect for people around you, be it your own children, be it your next pregnancy, be it your grandchildren's pregnancy, or, their exposure. So there is a ripple effect to passing this information on. So the number one thing that I like to focus on, really, the simplest really, is just don't buy this junk to begin with.
Right.
I mean, we fill our lives with so many products because we don't know better. I mean, I didn't know better. We think that everything in cleaning products is just super safe since it's on the shelf.
Right.
Now with COVID, we have enormous number of disinfectants that we really have to be thoughtful about, because we're trying to eradicate the virus and not get caught with it, not to be exposed. And yet we might be overdoing it because we're using products that are actually more harmful if they're used over time, and they may not be necessary. Cleaning products versus disinfectants is something we write about in the book, and when to use which, and being judicious. But if we don't buy certain carpet powders and fabric softeners and air fresheners and plug-ins and incense and candles, and that's just just what we breathe in. That's stuff that we touch when it lands on surfaces in our kitchens, in our playrooms. That's one way to save money, but not bring it into your home where it can collect, not only on the surfaces, but also into dust. The second thing I want people to think about, which I don't think gets a lot of attention, is drinking water. And the fact that we just drink so much water per body mass index over the course of a lifetime, that we really should understand why it's so important to have clean drinking water, and then how to do it. Because it's not cost prohibitive anymore. You can get a carbon filter, which is like a pitcher, and we talk about those, or a faucet or a refrigerator door carbon filter, all the way up to the more extreme types of filtration, like a reverse osmosis, which used to be very expensive and now are actually about $300 or around that area. And, really easy to put in with the plumber, and then about $40 a year to change out the cartridges. So it turns out to be much safer than even bottled plastic water for a variety of reasons.
I've been drinking filtered water. I just have a Brita filter in my refrigerator. It's probably not as effective as some of the other more extreme filters, but I think it's at least in the step in the right direction compared to drinking bottled water, which so many Americans do. So what is it with bottled water? Like, there's certain chemicals, obviously there's chemicals that are going into that to purify it. And what is it with bottled water that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, well, plastic bottled water, can be very critical in a time of major, catastrophic events, tornadoes, flooding. I will never discount that because it's easy access and it's available. But for 99% of Americans that are not going through that experience, or maybe if you have lead in your water, I've been, discussing this with people from Newark, New Jersey, and, Flint, Michigan, and all the places that made the news in terms of exposure to lead. But we have lead everywhere across the country in our water systems, believe it or not. But, really you want to think of something maybe long-term, like an RO filter or something more aggressive, because plastic water bottles, you don't know where they've been before they get to your refrigerated supermarket. And so what happens is, under high heat, and I actually take a picture of a truck loading on pallets of water in my book, but I'm sitting in 100-degree weather staring at them at a light. And it's not a refrigerated truck, mind you, as well. But we don't know where they've been. And so what happens when you have plastic, which is not a very strong matrix material, it's not like stainless steel or glass, which I do recommend across the board for all cookware and water bottles. But it leaches. Those chemicals leach. And here's a living example, is that if you buy Tupperware and you have clear Tupperware and you put it in your dishwasher maybe once, maybe even a couple times, you will start to see that the Tupperware gets darker and more opaque. And you can no longer see through it. That is a clear indication that heat, scratches, whatever it goes through, are going to make that softer matrix be available to whatever food and water it's holding on to.
Yep.
And so, that's a really kind of, like, wow, I never thought of that. That's true. That happened to me. And so really the plastics have been shown, many of the chemicals in plastics, mind you, they're not disclosed, tend to leach. And we have studies from, say, 2000, I put them in the book, which I think are very interesting. Sea snails, animal studies to start off. When they put the sea snails into plastic bottles versus glass bottles, we know that they have more eggs. They become more, which is an estrogenic effect. They grow more eggs in that environment because we know that they're getting exposed to low-level estrogens. And there's other studies that show levels of glass versus when they test the water that's been sitting in those, these have been done many studies, especially in 2011. There was a wonderful European study that looked at basically carbonated water and showing that it actually leached as well. Wow. But it's not uncommon. And in fact, that's how they discovered BPA. One of the studies many years ago is they were feeding lab animals and trying to figure out why the results were so skewed, but because the water was coming from plastic bottles and changing the exposure. So it was almost by accident that we found out that these plastics have estrogenic properties to them. So
that's unbelievable.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. And listen, what you don't know, you don't know. And I can tell you my whole, I would say 2/3 of my life thus far were spent eating Cheese Whiz Oreos and drinking Diet Dr. Pepper out of plastic bottles. So, we're all hoping to make a change that's going to somehow reduce our risk for future problems. That's all this is about in the most simple, practical way.
Yeah, man, you are saying so many things that I'm hearing for the first time in my life, where I'm like, the plastic Tupperware, like, do you recommend glass Tupperware then?
Yeah, I mean, it's all, sure. It's all accessible. Look, if you have to have a lid on top that's plastic and it doesn't really get into the food or drink, fine, so be it. Okay. But, you can't be so stringent that you lose your mind, right? You just got to be able to make simple changes over time. In fact, I post on a lot of my real-time choices and a lot of great information, like through nuggets of information, very simple, on The Smart Human, which you mentioned. So The Smart Human on Instagram, I just posted my stainless steel camping insulated food container that I now take to my favorite Indian restaurant. And at first they thought I was crazy, and so did my husband. and then I said, I just don't want hot plastics. Could you fill it in the kitchen? Now, some, of course, kitchens with pandemics and what's going on, COVID, will not do that. But this particular restaurant is honoring that issue, and they fill it up with 2 tikka masalas. I walk right out the door without hot plastics, and they actually now know me, and now my husband's all on board, and all of a sudden he wants his chicken tikka from the same containers. So, it can be, contagious, not in a bad way, but in a good way. Education can be very contagious. So I'm hoping people share these kind of ideas.
Yeah, I think there's something neat about, there's something that makes you feel good as a human when you start making small changes like that. Whether it's like something that's reusable or just safer products, like there's something when you start implementing it, just makes you feel better about yourself, better about the world you're living in. So
I agree. I think everything tastes better. I mean, my favorite beer has no is organic.
Yeah.
And by the way, organic is the only thing that has teeth, the only criteria that has teeth in the US in terms of food quality and labeling. So people should know that as well. All natural means nothing. Organic, if it says USDA organic, actually is the only thing that has criteria. There's nothing else. So, if you can see that label, and we talk about reading labels and how to understand them and which one, very, very simply, because I didn't know any of this stuff. So I decided to learn it and share it. And, instead of people spending 8 years trying to figure it all out, boom, here you can do it. And, just refer to it whenever you have a question. If you don't want to read it cover to cover, that's cool too.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. I love that you mentioned, it's not about making all of these changes overnight. Like, you don't have to clear out your whole house and all of your products overnight. It's just making small changes over time. And I'm a firm believer in that. Something I talk about quite a bit on my podcast, just generally with health, is, you don't have to fix everything overnight. You can just make those smaller changes as you go, whether it's with nutrition, sleep, better exercise, improving your relationships. Like, just take small bite size.
Or even getting rid of your couch. I mean, I tell this story, like, couches aren't cheap. And we knew our couches had flame retardant chemicals. I would twitch every time my kids would jump on it, but we just didn't have an extra couple grand to throw away, and get a new couch. And so it took a while for us to find the right place that had the cheaper couch with the right labeling showing it had removed flame retardant chemicals, which is what we teach people how to buy a couch or any furniture with the right labeling.
Wow.
And it was a real, like, we got one couch out. I was like, boom, that's awesome. And then maybe a year later, we got a different couch out from a different room. And, these are the kind of, personal, I think, successes, because, we all innately want to be healthy. Our bodies want to be healthy. So when you describe feeling good about those tiny moves, they do feel good. They feel like you have control over your destiny, your health and wellness in the future.
Yes. So wait, I got to touch on this furniture piece here. I had no idea that our furniture was exposing us. Tell me a little bit more on that.
Yeah, we talk about let's talk about flame retardant chemicals, because it's made a lot of news and some people have heard about this. But in the Chicago Tribune, if you want to look this up, this is a fabulous investigative reporting that went on a few years ago. And we have it in the book in terms of what they essentially said. But what happened was in 1975, the tobacco industry, surprise, surprise, got involved with this concept that flame retardant chemicals, which are usually brominated or fluorinated, so they last forever, and many chlorinated as well, were added to home furnishings, particularly couches, in order to give 12 extra seconds of non-burn time. If, say, for instance, a cigarette, which is why they got involved, landed on a couch, these chemicals supposedly would allow for 12 extra seconds after that cigarette or small flame hit some home furnishings, to allow people in the house to get out safely. Okay. Whoa. That was the premise of this law in 1975 that California pushed through. Now, since that time, we have discovered that it was really backed by the tobacco industry, who really did not want to change their cigarette formulations. And there's much evidence to show this. And then we also found out that many of these chemicals were really unhealthy to humans. And not only that, they were put in babies' pajamas, which sounds like a great idea. Like, you don't want your kid to have, God forbid, be burned if there's a fire in the house. However, these chemicals ended up getting in their bloodstream very quickly.
Wow.
And they are endocrine disruptors. And in fact, one of the famous researchers, Arlene Bloom, she's at UC Berkeley. She runs a whole great website called greensciencepolicy.org. She teaches people how to find couches without flame retardants and so on. And we reference her and her work and all the details of her work anyway in the book. But she's a hero, an unsung hero for popular media. But the idea that these chemicals were eventually found to be so harmful, they are in the blood of most Americans in the United States, particularly Californians, that they don't actually allow for a 12-second burn time, reduced burn time, and that they actually it was found that they had to be removed from a whole host of health-related issues. So in 2013, a new law was passed saying that manufacturers did not have to require those chemicals, did not have to put them in to the products that are sold in California, which made them have to start thinking about changing them for everyone in the country. Because again, once a state passes something like that, all of the couches in the whole country had flame retardants. Now that they're reversing it, now many of the manufacturers are reversing those chemicals. But that happened in 2013. So any of the new couches that do not have flame retardant chemicals that are harmful will actually have a label that says TB 117, which is the bill, Technical Bulletin -117-2013. And that will imply that there was no flame retardant chemicals added, and that it was probably made with wool or some other protective natural material without chemicals. And so we show labels. We show my chair. We want people to see actively what these labels look like.
Fascinating stuff. I was aware of chemicals through the products that we buy, and a lot of the pesticides that are found on our foods, That I was aware of. No idea that it was in our furniture. I mean, that is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, and
So
that's the
thank you
tip
for
of
sharing
the. We have other chemicals. We have antimicrobials on seats, right? Because we don't want people's bacteria on the seats. We have fragrances on fabrics. We have non-stick chemicals and stain guard chemicals, which are used a lot for uniforms, but also for raincoats and a lot of our clothing. And so, yeah, I mean, it's become a thing to infuse fabrics and textiles with chemicals. As added value. It's turning out to backfire, really, because we're now seeing that a lot of these chemicals are causing problems. And it's not just long-term risks of cancers or hormone disruption, but really also acute issues like, asthma or dermatitis or skin irritation, which actually happened recently with an airline who changed out their uniforms entirely across the whole, it was either Delta or United, you can look it up. And everyone was starting to, not everyone, I shouldn't say, that's pretty broad, but there was a lot of complaints about itching, scratching, dermatitis, asthma amongst their employees. And it actually made the news. So, that's related to the chemicals that were infused in those uniforms.
Unbelievable. Wow. I'm like, I'm a little bit at lost words right now. Just trying to process everything you're sharing is truly remarkable.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah,
take a deep breath. I do this all the time and I'm always taking a deep breath, but here's the thing, you tackle it as you can. It's not, you're not going to implode. Your head's not going to pop off. This is about doing it slowly and practically and cost effectively and not overwhelming, because each little thing you do, even if it's a little thing, like I got rid of an entire drawer of air fresheners. They were ocean breeze and berry blossoms and sunflower fields. And I had an entire drawer. And I took the entire drawer, it's like 6 years ago, and I just dumped it.
Yep.
And it was like one of the best things in the world. I had a drawer of all these free samples from all the cosmetic, when you used to go around the mall and get these free samples from all these different, cosmetic companies. I had drawers and drawers of, I put them all on the floor and there was literally like 1,000 little bottles of junk. Wow. And I got rid of all that. So, you just, you go as you go, and these are little wins. That's all.
Yeah, I was watching your TEDx talk last night, and I think you mentioned that you brought up air fresheners, and you said that they don't freshen the air; they're doing quite the opposite.
Yeah,
which is really
it's true. The marketing is just so powerful.
Yep.
It's like the food industry, right? With the food industry products, and they're putting one colored crappy thing into another, combining it, these candy bars that have 20 different types of. It's remarkable, the marketing power. It's
incredible.
Intense.
Yeah.
And we're taught to believe that we have to be cleaner than everybody, and we have to be thinner than everybody, and we have to have, our lawns have to be immaculate, when in fact our lawn care system is horrible with the level of pesticides that are sprayed. But you feel like you're the bad person on the block if you have one dandelion. Come on now. So, this is kind of where, we have to pull back and say, you know what, this is not acceptable, and I don't have to live this way. And,
exactly.
And I'm going to start right here with this one thing. That's all.
Yeah, you're right. The marketing is out of this world. I don't know if you're aware, but with Febreze, this was many decades ago when they first started, and they had a really tough time taking off, like actually having success with their product initially. And they looked at their marketing and they decided to tweak it to market where they advertised it in a way that it was more of a product to be used when you finished cleaning. Instead of like spraying the air while you were cleaning, it was more of a product to use when you were done cleaning, right? So you would vacuum, you'd wipe down your surfaces, you would sweep, or whatever it was that you did to clean your living room. And at the end, you could almost reward yourself by spraying your Febreze as like a nice fresh scent now that kind of capped off your cleaning session. And that's how they started advertising it. And as soon as they did that, it just took off. So you're right. It really
crazy.
Comes down to
and
marketing.
When I look at the commercial for that and I see a sink full of like fish, rinds, like nasty stuff all over the house, and there's someone just spraying as if that's the answer. I'm just shocked by the level of like, for real, why don't you clean your sink?
Yeah.
You know, and the other thing I was going to mention, there's a lot of marketing right now for disinfectants. This is a huge issue because we now have 100, at least from the CDC, you can actually go, we have the link for it, you know, all these hand sanitizers that are being recalled because they're being cut with a lot of harmful chemicals, including methanol. So we have a lot of really crazy things being done now out of fear, legitimate fear, you know, in a variety of places, but certainly a swath of fear everywhere and every how. My very intelligent family member and one of my very wise and intelligent patients both said to me that they were buying this spray that's hitting the markets all over the advertising for Microban. And people don't realize that even though they're advertising antibacterial, the virus, COVID, is a virus. It doesn't even respond to an antibacterial. It has nothing to do with antibacterial chemicals. So on the one hand, it's a waste for COVID. Number two, if you look at the label, which I'm going to post on, 99.93% of the bottle is made up of other ingredients.
Wow.
It's literally like 0.04 of the active ingredient is made up of the active ingredient, and and it's all not disclosed. So you're not privy to the information of the other ingredients, which it says fresh scent. That's that's a group of phthalates. Phthalates are chemicals within endocrine disruption that are used to prolong the smell of perfumes, of product, you know, anything that has a smell, usually that's a phthalate kind of driven chemical group. So not only are you not going to solve the problem of COVID, you're going to be exposed dramatically to chemicals you don't even know what are in them, particularly phthalates, which probably are in them. And, you know, they're just taken off because even, like I said, people that I consider critical thinkers or may have had some background in science did not know that coronavirus is a virus and that bacteria, antibacterials, antibiotics do not in any way affect a virus. They only work on bacteria.
Wow.
So I'm going to post on that. It pissed me off. So
yeah, right. Gosh, this is just mind-boggling stuff.
Yeah.
How about food? Obviously, our food that you'd find at grocery stores is very much exposed to lots of chemicals. I know you live on a farm, and what is your lifestyle with food? Are you growing a lot of your own food?
Absolutely not. I have no time. I literally, you know, as a representative for this topic, I feel a little bit shameful that I'm not doing, you know, composting and growing my own organic garden. And I don't love to cook that much, believe it or not. My husband does that. So I'm just a realist, you know, and I say, if you are me and you can't find the time to do these things, you don't have the time, effort, you're not going to, you know, we have tons of do-it-yourself personal care products in the book, recipes, great ones, really simple. I mean, they're for deodorants, they're for cleaners, a whole chapter on, you know, cleaning products and what to do, and also do it yourself, or here's how you can find them safely through this website. You can actually look up the safe ones. That's very simple. I want options for everybody. I want options for people who are super, super busy, no time, maybe no extra cash, who are limited in funds, who have no necessarily a background in science. And then I want it for people who, you know, have plenty of time to, you know, grow their own food, cook their own food. You know, I'm fascinated by people who can do that because I think that's amazing. But it's not me. And so I just want people to have as many options as possible. Like, for instance, if you don't have access to organic fruit and produce, which many parts of this country do not, even in supermarkets, believe it or not. You know, I want people to understand that if you buy produce, there's several ways that you can locate ones that have far fewer pesticide residues on the surface of those fruits and vegetables. And that if you just use 1 part water and 1 part white vinegar, which you can get anywhere. White vinegar is a cleaning solution, but it's also great for rinsing and soaking produce to help remove those pesticide residues. And when you look at the water, it's pretty nasty. Like, you know, you're doing something right. But that's for people who may not have access to organic food. You know, so you want to have options for everybody. And that was really quite important. And especially when I teach. I mean, I teach at all different types of schools for various reasons. And you can't just talk to the people that have money and education and resources and support. You have to talk to people that are really struggling. And how can they make a dent in their lives and their children's lives as well?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that and your honesty to be like, look, hey, this is a huge problem that we have, and it's very complex. And if anyone that's listening right now feels overwhelmed, there's a reason that you feel overwhelmed, because there's a lot of things in our world that are affected by these chemicals and these toxins. So it would almost be, I don't want to say impossible, but it is a very big challenge to think that you could just tackle all of the issues with this topic. So I appreciate you sharing that, like, hey, I don't have the time, and I also want to
do the best you can. I look at life as sort of 80-20. Maybe that's my own excuse for not being perfect, but I think that 80% of your time, if your water is coming from a really good filtered source, that's great. You're not going to travel necessarily and have a filter available unless you carry a water filter that actually has filters. And we talk about that. Yeah. But, the idea is that, you're going to go out to restaurants where you have no control necessarily of whether that food came from a can or whether it came from, fresh out of the backyard. You're going to drink water at restaurants. I try not to, but if you have no choice, you don't know where that water came from. Is it a well? Is it a municipal treatment plant that got really dinged for some recent findings on their water, and you're getting it in your restaurant? I mean, these are the things you can't control. So 80-20 is a reasonable way to not panic, but to live your life as best. You can control your home so much better than anywhere else. So if you make your air quality better in your home, where you spend majority of your time, you make your products, your furniture, and choose wisely with food and drinking water, you really can do a wonderful service for just the hours you spend in your home. Yeah.
No, I appreciate you making this so relatable to so many people, because look, majority of the people that are listening to this right now, they're probably thinking, like I just mentioned, like, this is a huge, big problem. I'm not going to be able to tackle it all. So like you said, you do what you can. And if we can all do that, then we'd be living in a much, much better world, I think. That's great. So what else would you like to cover that I haven't asked yet, just on this topic in general?
Sure. So I kind of had fun with my co-author in deciding what was in the book. And so, of course, we covered the biggies, what to do and think about if you're thinking about getting pregnant, and why it would matter in terms of either cleaning up your body beforehand or even during pregnancy, or oops, we got pregnant, had a baby, and now what do I do? So we wanted to make sure everyone had some good information on that. Water, detoxing naturally, nothing wacky, but just using your own physiology through, exercise and sweating or sauna. We talk about how sleep is so critical to actually getting rid of chemicals around the brain. We always think of sleep as just, being awake, cognition, memory, but it's also really critical, believe it or not, for the new science of the fluid around the brain that actually gets rid of chemicals while you sleep. So that's another added value. But I also wanted to throw in things that were personal. So my kids play soccer on soccer turf, and I wanted people to know how limited information we have on, the tire crumb that's crumbled onto the synthetic blades of grass, and why that matters, what it's made of. It's not to say don't do it, don't let your kids play sports. It was a matter of saying, listen, this is the modern world we live in. How do we handle this situation as best we can? So my kids come off the field, they go right into the shower, they use soap and water. It's a challenge because they're two young boys, so any soap and water at any time or shower is critical and hard to come by. But these are the things that we now have built into our routine. If they want to play soccer, they have to, or lacrosse, they have to come home afterwards, within a reasonable amount of time, scrub, get rid of those crumbs out of their ears, their socks, their clothing, leave your cleats outside. Really try not to get exposed inside the house with all of that remnants from the soccer field, the sports fields. There's lead, there's a whole bunch of problems. We go into it, but again, you have to, life is a risk benefit ratio. And I'm trying to work through that as a mom. I talk about alcohol, which is, I'm not a big drinker, at least anymore, but I mean, the idea to have, to pick and choose wine and beer that's organic and why it matters now. That's also an interesting conversation. Doesn't mean people are going to stick to it, but it's something to think about. So, I just wanted to have a little more fun about people's day-to-day routines and what they might start looking at now through the eyes of, chemical exposure as opposed to sort of calories or which diet. It's just a different way to experience the world.
Yeah, no, I'm super happy you brought up some of those lifestyle components, because earlier you mentioned there's really like 3 criteria that make up our overall health, which is our DNA, Second would be lifestyle choices. And then third is our environment. And I feel like we've covered environment pretty well here in our talk. And I wanted to cover a little bit on that lifestyle piece. And one thing I'm really focusing in on more now is sleep, and realizing just as a whole, as a country, a lot of Americans are missing out on good quality sleep. Not only are we not getting enough sleep and as much sleep as we were generations ago, but we're not getting quality sleep. And I'm happy you're talking about that. Is there anything else you'd like to share? I know there's so much more in the book, but with sleep, like, is there anything else that you'd like to cover?
Yeah. So, we actually talk a lot about sleep because, again, my integrative medicine training with Dr. Weil and all the folks in that world, I give a lot of recommendations for sleep. That's even supplements that are, not that I'm pushing supplements, but certainly natural supplements like magnesium that I talk about, which kind and why, and a variety of other sleep related additives to your life. But a lot of it also is technology. We have a whole chapter on technology, not just because of how it stimulates the brain, but because of EMF radiation and why that too can affect sleep, not just the social aspect. Right. So we wanted people to understand how to use technology safely, even not even using a laptop on your lap. Because again, I see this in schools all over the place. Kids are on their computer, but they're on their laps, and it's the worst place for a young developing person to have a laptop that acts as a signaling, an antenna for EMF. So, really it's again about living your life the best you can under the circumstances. I love my phone. I just use my phone carefully. I don't put it on my body. I don't let my boys put it in their pants due to, a whole bunch of risks with development of sensitive areas. But we also, by the way, have a whole chapter on medication. And it's not to throw medication under the bus, because I'm a rheumatologist. I rely on such critical medication to keep my patients healthy. But it's talking about various classes that may actually be used overabundantly, and that which do actually have health effects besides their intended effect. And I want people to think of, and it's called medications are chemicals too, because people often think that is a separate category. And I actually want people to look at them as chemicals that are being introduced to your body as well, that may be entirely necessary and may be entirely beneficial, but at least to give some thought as to whether there's other alternatives, and that what some of them may actually be contributing to. So it's just, again, another perspective on what we're doing already that may be very helpful for people. Yeah,
gosh, that is fascinating stuff. I appreciate you sharing all of that. Before I get to my last question for you, and by the way, I don't say this to all of my guests because, majority of the guests I have on my podcast, they are authors. They've recently released a book, or they're releasing a book in the coming months. And if I bought each and every one of their books, I would just never have the time to read them all. But this one, and I genuinely mean this, after we hang up, I'm ordering your book.
Thank you.
And I encourage my listeners to do the same, because just based on this talk, there's been so much that I've learned, and I'm excited to learn even more through the book. So
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dan. And we don't share, we don't actually, interestingly enough, we don't talk about brands. We don't share product names. I wanted this to be so squeaky clean because, again, my work and my mission moving forward is to get this into schools and colleges around the country.
Sure.
And this is sort of the template for that curriculum. And it really can't be, because companies buy each other up. And even a great reputable company can have actually bad products within a reputable company. Changing of ownership changes formulations. And we just didn't want anything that wasn't evergreen. So what we give is we give resources and vetted apps and ways to look up your product over the next several years or years ahead, so that you can constantly be able to check what it is in the market that is of value to you and safe. And that goes for pesticides and getting rid of lawn chemicals. We have great apps for that, or websites, looking up, again, couches or furniture. It's all about the tools. And making them simple enough that anyone can jump on and use them, not about the actual brands and products themselves.
That's great. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's really cool, because not everyone does that. So I appreciate that approach.
Yeah.
I will be sure to have your book, the link to that book in the description and show notes. Where else can people find you? I know I mentioned it in your bio. There it is. I love it. Where else can people find you? You're on Twitter, Instagram. You have your website, you have a podcast. Where can people find you?
Yeah, basically, I wanted everything to be under the smart human. I actually intended it never to be about me. I wanted to be about the education. I don't care who you are, what your politics are. I don't care what your education. I don't care what your money load is. I
Yep.
want people just to know that, they can get really sane, vetted, evidence-based information,
Yeah.
and resources and tools, and share it with whoever they feel would benefit most from it. So the Smart Human is my baby, and that's the one that's the smarthuman.com, which has podcasts, radio shows, and a bunch of articles, resources. On Facebook, I post Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Yesterday, I did breaking news because I like people to know about the market. In fact, PFAS chemicals in California, Gavin Newsom just signed a bill trying to eliminate those harmful chemicals from firefighter materials and foam. So that's pretty critical. But essentially, I want an ongoing conversation. That's why I hope people will follow on social media because, it'll keep people kind of up to date and give them new ideas and just in nuggets. And so that's the smarthuman.com. I practice in Princeton, New Jersey. If anyone needs to see me for any reason, I'm certainly here, and I'm trying to, certainly see as many people who are interested who want to come see me. But certainly that wasn't the point of our podcast. But yeah, I'm thrilled to be getting out there. It's been a while, and now I think is the right time, and I'm building up my confidence to really get out there and shout on mountaintops. So
yeah, I love that.
So thank you for the platform as well.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. So my last question I have for you is, you've made this your life work and your life's work. And what does that mean to you? And who do you want to impact the most with the work that you are doing?
Yeah, this is the first time someone's asked me that. I think when you find a passion for something that is so wrong, like you feel wronged and you feel like you're, as a physician, I see so many ill people now at younger ages.
Wow.
Particularly endocrine disruption types, like thyroid conditions in young people in their 20s, or thyroid cancer, which is now epidemic amongst young people. Wow. I'm seeing more and more, of course, obesity and diabetes, which are also related to these environmental chemicals, inflammation. Now we have COVID, which we know these chemicals increase inflammation and comorbidities that contribute to worse outcomes if exposed to this virus. So it has never been more important for people to really take a look at this issue. It's sad that it takes coronavirus for people to have a little bit more attention about it, but it is a strong relationship. And I think, my mission is really to have people be less ill. I think people are sick and tired of being sick, and they're now being sicker at, breast cancer at younger ages. It's just, and men too, they have a whole host of health issues. Testicular cancer in men is on the rise. It has been for 2 decades. So my goal is to really make sure people think about prevention as opposed to treatment, and really try to get upstream to pregnant women, pre-pregnancy, young children, get young people and people who are going to, start having a full life to really think about, everybody, of course, but particularly high school students is where I'm aiming my education towards, because they're savvy, they're body interested, they're or I should say tech savvy. They're going to one day vote whichever way they choose. They're going to vote with their dollars through purchasing power. They use the most personal care products than any other demographic in the country, than compared to women, even adult women and even men. So this is the endocrine vulnerable period. There's vulnerable periods of exposure. This is one of them, and so I really want to reach out to teenagers who are starting off their lives and may one day have children if they choose. So it just seemed like the perfect demographic, as you saw from the TED Talk. I really felt like that's where the love is, and that's what people want. So I'm going to go for it. Yeah. I
love that. That is incredible. You're doing incredible work, and I just encourage you to keep it up and keep fighting.
Oh, thank you so much. And you know what? It takes a village. So, everyone who supports me in my world, back at you, because this is not easy stuff. And I want people to know as much as they can from the right voices that they trust. So it's great when we can all join in.
Definitely. I love that. Awesome. Well, Dr. Aly Cohen, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your mission and your expertise. Like I said, keep up the great work and keep on the good fight.
Thank you, Dan, for having me. It was a pleasure.